Okay, we're now on to the analytical tools and the evaluation criteria that you'll be using in year 12 throughout the year. And you will have already used some things in year 11 as well. So you should be familiar definitely with the SWOT analysis by now. And you also will probably have been introduced to some of the evaluation criteria. But we're going to go over each of these now. There are particular things that you need for the Unit 3 Topic 2 assignment. So that is what we're going to be looking at today. In terms of the syllabus, it says that you need to be able to select data and information relating to traditional, digital, and emerging marketing platforms to analyze the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So that's a SWOT analysis aspect. You need to be looking at marketing and operational functions for a mature business to analyze outsourcing power interest. So that's our power interest grid. And I mentioned earlier about how you've got this idea of control when it comes to outsourcing. And the power interest grid allows you to look at the power and the interest of different stakeholders. A business's current situation in a competitive, hostile environment to analyze using the SWOT analysis, and competitors in a hostile environment to analyze the USP, which is the USP analysis. And then interpret relationships, patterns, and trends in terms of marketing platforms, outsourcing, and situational SWOT and USP analysis tools. So this unit is really heavily focused on operations, marketing, and outsourcing, which you hopefully will have noticed so far. So keep in mind that your piece of assessment is not going to get you to do all of this. So you won't be doing a SWOT analysis, a power interest grid, and a USP analysis. More than likely, we'll be doing one or two of these, but you still need to understand all of them because you don't know yet what you will have on your assignment. So let's go through each of these in turn, starting with our SWOT analysis. So it's a method of assessing a business's internal strengths and weaknesses, and then external opportunities and threats. So strengths, what does the business do well and what does it have as an advantage over competitors? And weaknesses are just the opposite. What does the business lack or do poorly and what disadvantages does it have? Opportunities you could make use of in the business. So maybe there's expansion opportunities. Maybe there's an opportunity to invest in new technologies. Maybe there's increasing demand for certain things and you can leverage that to meet that demand. Threats are often about competitors, so what competitors the business has. It also can be just the business environment though as well. Thinking about those macro factors that we looked at earlier, they can all impact the business in positive or negative ways. So maybe there's legislative changes, maybe there's environmental issues that are affecting or threatening a business. So if we try and apply this to an example, so recently Optus had its national kind of outage, which was something that it's been heavily criticized for in terms of the way that it tried to manage that. So if we think about Optus in terms of a SWOT analysis, we could say its strengths perhaps are its existing large customer base. It's got around 10 million people that use Optus. And maybe you could say that it's got good capital as well behind it, the money that they can invest in different things since it is such a big company. But then weaknesses, maybe that's where the reputation at the moment is quite weak. Opportunities. I know that they have their board is in Singapore rather than Australia. So maybe an opportunity is to bring it to Australia or to have more Australian involvement in the way the company is run. Maybe there's an opportunity to make it up to existing consumers to try and get them to stay loyal to the brand. Incentives or rewards or something for loyalty. Threats, definitely threats from competitors because people may be considering leaving the organization and going to Telstra or Vodafone, for example, and changes in the business environment. So things like they've already had issues with legislation that changed last year with the data breach that I mentioned earlier. So there could be other sort of changes in the environment that may affect them with this as well. Question 9 is describe Pareto's principle. So remember that this is that idea of the 80-20 rule. And think about what that means then for a business, what the 80%, sometimes the 80% is what's important and sometimes the 20% is what's important. It depends on which way you look at that rule. Next up is the power interest grid. Now, this is used to analyze the power and the interests of stakeholders in a project. So measuring stakeholders' power and interest gives the individual or the team leading the project insight into the level of engagement and communication that each stakeholder needs. So it's a bit of like a research kind of thing where you're getting some insight into what you need to do to meet the wants and needs of those who are affected by what you're doing. So conducting a power interest grid involves plotting stakeholders on a graph. And the y-axis, which is vertical, represents the level of power, and the x-axis, the horizontal, represents the level of interest in the project. So the graph is divided into 4 sections, and each of these segments is representing a different degree of power and interest. So you've got monitor, which is low power and low interest. Keep informed, low power and high interest. So the idea is if they don't have much interest and they don't have much power, you still need to monitor them because that could change. But at the moment, they aren't really important. You don't need to be constantly communicating with them. You don't need to be consulting with them. You just need to keep track of them in case their position changes somehow. With keep informed, they've got high interest, but not much power. So you want to keep them in the loop with what's happening, but you don't really need to actually keep them satisfied so much because they don't have the power to change things or to influence your decisions in any way. Keep satisfied is about having high power but then low interest. So they're not very interested in what's happening, but they do have power potentially. So you want to just make sure that they're happy with whatever's going on so you can continue, and that is all that's needed there. Whereas manage closely is about having high power and high interest. And so you need to not just monitor them, but really keep them involved, consult with them, make sure that everything that you're doing is aligning with what they want. So let's have a look at an example. So General Motors, the car company, wants to only manufacture electric cars by 2035 and become carbon neutral by 2040. And the company needs to determine the power and interest of stakeholders to effectively engage with them throughout the project. So this is pretty ambitious. and they want to make sure that they are meeting those consumer needs or those stakeholder needs, in fact. So the first step is, of course, to identify who are the stakeholders in any given situation. In this case, you've got the CEO, you've got various managers, employees, external organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund. You've got fuel stations who would be losing out on money because all of these cars would be developed that are electric and that don't need their fuel. Electric vehicle charging stations, they would benefit from this development. Environmental activists and consumers, of course, as well. And step 2 is to plot the stakeholders on your power interest grid. You can see here how we've got those 4 segments I mentioned earlier. Now, the thing about plotting is you can think about it far too much sometimes. So try not to get really caught up in where you're placing things. You do need to be logical and you need to be able to justify your decisions, and you need to be able to be thinking about the different stakeholders in relation to one another. So would this stakeholder really have more power than this stakeholder? Would they be more interested or less interested? So you need to have that element of comparison. But in saying that, just thinking, should I move it half a centimeter to the left, half a centimeter to the right, up or down? Don't get too caught up in that kind of thing. You're thinking about the relationship between different stakeholders. So what should have higher or lower interest and power than the others? And you're also thinking about the category that it's falling in. So think carefully about whether you place something in. So for example, here we've got consumers. They're in the keep informed section rather than manage closely. It would be a big decision to move that above into the manage closely section. So do think carefully about the actual section that it's falling under. And you can also decide that it deserves to be put right in the middle. You can put it right on the line as well if you feel that that's where it should sit. Evaluation criteria. So in your IA2, you'll need to evaluate business strategies to make a decision and propose a recommendation. So to do this, you need to use the different evaluation criteria, which there are 4 of. So competitiveness, stakeholder satisfaction, effectiveness, and efficiency. And according to the syllabus, you may have to evaluate marketing strategies for a business in a hostile environment, operating strategies, or marketing and operational activities to outsource as an alternative business strategy for the maturity stage. And for all of those things, you also need to make a decision and propose a recommendation using the criteria. So you evaluate it using the criteria, and off the back of that, you can then justify the decisions and recommendations. So let's go through each of these. Competitiveness. Now, the syllabus does provide definitions of each of these. So the syllabus says, to what degree has the business offered products or services that meet or exceed market standards in relation to other businesses? So you can compare different businesses and think about how competitive they are with one another. And then competitiveness can be measured according to lots of different things. So you can be looking at the 2 businesses in relation to their market share, the resources, the growth, the profit, intentions to expand, and the strategies that they use to drive competitiveness. With stakeholder satisfaction, it's to what extent has the business considered and managed stakeholder expectations in achieving goals or objectives. And remember that stakeholders are really broad. It can include customers, employees, investors, suppliers, and management. And you can look at this in lots of different ways as well. It could be customer-based growth, in which case it's likely that customers are satisfied and then maybe referring on other customers. Employee retention, keeping them around, shows that they're satisfied. And continued loyalty and funding from investors. Investors wouldn't be investing in the business if they weren't satisfied with the financial performance of the business. Effectiveness. To what degree has the business achieved goals or objectives, and to what extent has the business solved targeted problems? So it's relating to a business achieving its goals, and it can be applied to any kind of business strategy. Is it effective? So this is about doing the right thing, using the right strategy, and the right approach to things. Efficiency, on the other hand, is doing that thing in the right way. So to what degree has the business optimized its use of resources and application of processes to achieve those goals or objectives? So things like the time and the effort and the money that something requires indicates the efficiency of that thing. So you can be doing the right thing, but you could be doing it in the wrong way. An effective strategy that's done in an inefficient way. It can also be the other way around. You can be doing the wrong thing, but be doing it in quite an efficient way.